Sports Fish Advisory Board, Maine. Yes. Sports Fish Advisory Board, North. So that's the one above. Sports Fish Advisory Board, South. Where's the South? Okay, barely see. So put your hands down once you've already been, acknowledged. Stevenson Halibut.
And well, I was just going to note for the chair's information that when someone's hands up and there's we enable their mic, that actually functions as lowering their hand. So if you see their hand up and all of a sudden it's lowered again, that's just because the support team in the background has enabled their mic.
Okay, that's going to be interesting. Station Hall, okay, good. Sports Fishing Institute of BC. Sports Fishing Institute of BC. Right. South Vancouver Island Anglers Coalition. Okay. United Fishermen's and Allied Workers Union. Yep. Vancouver Island Longlights Association. Yep. Okay, so scroll down. West Coast Fishing Guides Association. West Coast Fishing Guides Association. Okay, don't see them. So, have I missed anyone from Canada that's here? You may have sent your accreditation in, or you're going to. Oh, Sports Fishing Institute of BC is now here. Pacific Coast Fishing Vessel Owners Guild. Okay.
Where are they? Am I missing them? Oh, here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else from Canada that have been missed? I didn't call your name out. Yeah, we got the Sports Fishing Institute of BC. Okay.
And the accreditations are all correct?
Yep, as far as I can see off of this list, yeah. I haven't seen the forms, but I assume they're all. Is Lauren Iverson? Is that Lauren wanting to say something?
Will you please enable Lauren's mic?
You there, Lauren?
Yeah.
Lauren?
This is Chuck. I put my hand up. What is going on?
I don't know. I can see I don't see your hand up, but oh, that means because your microphone's okay. So what's going on here? I thought Lauren had his hand up, and he was in blue. I'm not too sure what that signifies. Lara, what does blue mean?
So Lauren did have his hand up, but it may have been that he wanted to indicate he was present, but we do have him as being present and part of BC Longliners Association on the list.
Yes, okay.
And then the West Coast Fishing Association is also now here.
Okay.
Is that, yes, so Pat's here, so we'll undo the process.
It looks like Pat's here, but he says in the chat that his raised hand is not working. So hopefully somebody's helping him with that.
Yes, if you're having challenges like that, please let us know in the help desk, and we'll get the team working with you on it.
So we have the BC Halibut Longliners Association's hand is up and their microphone is there. Pardon?
BC Halibut Longliners.
Yeah, we got that, Lauren. Good, thanks. You're on the list.
Okay, we ready for the U.S. side? Okay, so everybody on the U.S. side, hopefully ready. We're going to do the same thing. Go through, call names, raise a hand. Hopefully where we've got multiple delegates, you guys are deciding who is the spokesperson delegate for your organization. And we don't need to know that right now, but it will help with the process if you have one person. If you need an alternate, we'll deal with that, but let's try to keep it to one. Okay, great. So let's go through it. ADAC Community Development Corporation. Got them here. We got them here twice. You only get to vote once. Alaska Charter Association. Oh, do we have Alaska Charter Association? I see it. Oh yeah, there they are. Okay. Alpha Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. Got them. Alaska Whitefish Trawlers. Great. APICTA. Aleut Corporation. Area 3A Charter Boat Association. Looks like they are not here. Is that right? Not coming up with anybody. Okay. We're dropping them. Okay, Area 4 Harvesters Alliance. So we have the Area 4 Harvesters Alliance. Okay, not seeing them either. Okay, Atka Fishermen's Association. Let's see, who's Terry Henshaw? Terry Henshaw, are you with Atka Fishermen?
Terry is Annabelle Halibut Association with BC.
Okay, that's why I don't know that name. Okay, so then I'm guessing that means we don't have Atka Fishermen's Association here. Okay, I'll keep going. Bristol Bay Economic Development Corporation. They're here, great. Cape Barnabas, here. Catch Association. Gotcha. Central Bering Sea Fishermen's Association. Awesome. Calling in from St. Paul. Coastal Conservation Association.
Through the chair, may we adjust this to, I mean, we can follow up with CBSFA to have a single representative or two at the most, ideally?
Yeah, I'm going to let them work that out, and they can tell us in the chat who their representative is. I think they're having to do a relay by phone via Anchorage or some groovy satellite thing, so I'm going to let them work that out. Okay, Coastal Conservation Association. I'm not seeing Coastal Conservation Association. I see Andyville Halibut Association with their hand up. Maybe you could take your hand down because I get confused easily with the little virtual hand. All right, I'm not seeing that one.
We'll get to you.
Coastal Trollers Association. Gotcha. Could you scroll it up a little? Cordova District Fishermen United. Got you. Ooh, now I'm lost. Okay.
Oh, sorry, did you get these, the ones above it, Linda?
I can't see the ones above it anymore, so I'm not sure. We got Coastal Trollers. We got Coastal Villages Regional Fund. Did we? Coastal Villages Regional Fund here? Yes, we got them. And we got CDFU, Deep Sea Fishermen's Union.
In Cook Inlet Recreational Fishermen?
Did I skip over them?
They're in orange.
Okay, Cook Inlet Recreational Fishermen. Not seeing them. But we do have Sean with Deep Sea Fishermen's Union. And we did have CDFU. Okay, and Edmonds veteran independent longliners, maybe. I think maybe not this year. Is that right? No one from Edmonds? Oh, we do. Okay, gotcha. And the 3B4A Fishermen's Association. Nobody from 3B4A. I feel like I saw 2 hands up for Edmonds veteran. Do we have? Okay. I'll let you put something in the chat. So 3B4A Fishermen's Association, I'm not seeing a rep from. Okay, we're going to move on. Fishing Vessel Owners Association. Got you, pair. Freezer Longline Coalition. And you guys figure out who your delegate is and let us know in the chat so we can be clear. Can you scroll down? Thank you. We have anybody else down there? Okay, Homer Charter Association. Got you. Okay. Humboldt Area Saltwater Anglers. Is that Mary marking? Is the Humboldt area? I guess it'd be good to have your organization name up there if you can correct that. Halibut Coalition. Sorry, it looks like I missed you. Got you, Tom. Okay. And Juneau Charter Boat Association. Is anybody here from Juneau Charter Boat Association? Nope. Okay. Looks like they're missing. K-Bay Fisheries. Also missing K-Bay Fisheries. Kodiak.
So missing Juneau, sorry, missing Juneau and K-Bay?
It seems to be. I didn't see hands
Okay,
go up.
thank you.
Okay, Kodiak Vessel Owners Association. Now I know Kodiak's here, right? Michael Offerman is our rep for Edmonds. I'm not seeing Kodiak Vessel Owners Association, which surprises me because, okay, Cruise Off Fisheries. Got you, Jim. Next Generation Fishermen. Got you, Garrett. North Pacific Fisheries Association. Malcolm's here. Ozinki Community Holdings. Anybody here from Ozinki? Not present. Okay, PVOA. Got Megan. Prince William Sound Charter Boat Association. Also not here. Malcolm, can you take your hand down if maybe it's just lagging? So Puget Sound Anglers. Not seeing Puget Sound Anglers. Whoa, you jumped the screen and then I lose it. Quileute Department of Natural Resources. Nope. Okay. Recreational Fishing Alliance. National. No. Recreational Fishing Alliance California. We've got Tom here from there. So we've got California but not national, is how I read that. Okay, Sablefish and Halibut Pod Association. Got you. SPC. Carter, I think, got kicked out, got back in. There you are. Okay. Southeast Alaska Fishermen's Alliance. Got you. Sitka Halibut and Sablefish Marketing Association. Phil, are you there? I think think he's participating, but not getting. I see Sablefish and Halibut Pod Association. Can you raise your hand? There you go. All right. We see our Southeast Alaska Guides Organization. Got you. St. Paul Fishing Company. Got you. Tribal Government of St. Paul. Simeon, we have Tribal Government of St. Paul. I'm guessing he's here, just we're having a lag. But let's keep going. UFMA, Jeff Stevens. United Fishermen's Marketing Association, Jeff? Not with us. Okay. Westport Charter Boat Association. Not showing up. And Yukon Delta Fisheries Association. Got Landry. Okay. All right. Excuse me, did I miss anybody? Anybody here that didn't get their name called? Or
I believe Recreational Fishing Alliance is now here from what we see in the chat.
National, great, okay. And Kodiak Vessel Owners is back, so add them in. Tribal Government of St. Paul is having technical issues, but they hope to be here. Uzinki couldn't register because of limitation on characters. There's a lot of characters in every town in Alaska. That surprises me. So let's count all those as being present, and we'll figure out how to make sure they can register and vote. Okay. Is the tech team happy that you have a complete list? Oh.
Oh, we are. Just if there's any additions that we weren't captured.
It looks like Alaska Whitefish Trawlers Association, Rebecca Skinner has her hand up. Did we miss you, Rebecca? You should be able to speak now. No? Did we get Alaska Whitefish Trawlers?
We did. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it was an accidental. Oh, now she's checked. All good, green. Okay, we'll take that as good and go. All right, so I think if we've got complete lists, we'll keep watching the chat, and if you had
Just lost Linda.
Uh-oh.
Just froze up. While we're waiting for Linda to reconnect, is the BC Sablefish Association representative here? Scott.
Is that above here?
It's Canadian Sablefish Association. I'm sorry, the Canadian Sablefish Association representative here. Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, he is. I didn't get him, Ron Cron. Okay.
So we will use this list to accredit or to acknowledge people as being accredited when they come through, and they'll have the proceeding 00 for Canadian members and then the proceeding 01 for American members. This will also be with the chair, so if there's any changes or updates that need to be made, definitely let us know. But this is what we will be going with. Please do not adjust your name. If it changes once you come in, it's because our support team is editing your name to make sure that we're able to assign you a vote or credit a vote to you. And back to you, Chair.
Okay. Is someone going to try to see if Linda can reconnect?
Mm. Yes, I am working on it as well.
Okay. Okay.
It looks like her video's back.
So I guess I don't think so. No, maybe she just has to reconnect. So we're going to, we said at the beginning, the preference by the secretariat is to have the co-chair elections after, at the very end of the meeting, so you're electing them similar to the way they do the commissioners, the chairs for the actual commissioners at the end of the meeting, set for the meeting before next meeting. So especially for this one. So is there any? I think Kathy has got her hand up. On unmute, Kathy. No, it's down again. Okay, is there any, raise your hand or any objection to that kind of format for this meeting? And Laura has given the explanation of why. Jerry, SFAB Maine. Did you unmute his mic?
I would simply move on behalf of Canada that Jim Lane be confirmed as chair of the meeting for this session.
Yeah, but
As co-chair, sorry.
Yeah, but the request from the IPHC, the secretariat, is that we confirm the chairs for the 2022 meeting at the end of this meeting.
Yeah, no, my point was that I think in order to simply keep things, it would be good at this point that Canada, and I assume the U.S. will wish to do the same, we confirm that Jim Lane is the Canadian co-chair, Brenda Behnken the U.S. co-chair, and then the new cycle can start at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Otherwise, technically, you're not the co-chair at this point.
Yeah. Kathy, Sifa. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You're back.
Hopefully that doesn't happen every, half hour.
So in your absence, we went over the rationale for the co-chairs, but Jerry Christensen moved the motion on behalf of Canada that I would be the chair for this meeting, and I think, and then maybe that gets us through to the end of the meeting when we cover it off for the 2022. Otherwise, when we're not chairs, according to our rules of procedure. Do we have to take a vote on that, Laura? I can't remember if we have to vote the chairs. Should remember, but I don't.
Yeah, if it's agreed, then no.
Okay.
And certainly just on the chairs to simplify it for this session.
So we ready for a motion on the U.S. side? Looks like, is that Sifa? I can see a mic and a hand raised, but all I see is an F, but whoever that is. Or it might be NCFA, whoever has. Anybody?
Yes, Sifa,
CPA has.
your mic should be enabled. You should be able to speak.
Oh, we got Malcolm. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Yeah, I move that Linda Behnken retain the chair for this meeting, and we have an election at the end of the meeting for next year.
Thank you. Is there a second? I guess Seago is the second. Oh, we got a few seconds. Okay. So did you do, Jim, just any objection? Is that how you did the Canadian side?
No, we never got to the second.
Oh, okay.
Motion. We need a second on the Canada side.
Okay, well, let's wrap up this side. If there's any objection, maybe everybody lower your hand. If there's any objection to the co-chair motion, raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, we'll count that as a pass. And then, Jim, why don't you do a second and any objection on your side?
Okay, so we have a second for me being the co-chair. Okay, PHMA, Chris. Put your hands down, everybody. So if there's any objections, put your hands up. So BC Wildlife Federation, you're objecting? You want to do the job? Okay. See no objections? We're passed. Wow. What time is it?
We're flying. Okay, so I think next is adoption of the agenda and arrangements for the session. And I think there was a request to add the halibut minimum size, changing the halibut minimum size limit, to add that to our agenda. So I'll just give, if somebody wants that added to the agenda, a chance for someone to do that. I see Sifa's hand up, so if you want to make a suggestion to the agenda, now's the time. Go ahead, Kathy. For some reason we're not hearing Kathy. I'm not sure if the tech team can work with her, but it looks like Malcolm, your hand is up. Why don't you jump in? Looks like you have the mic now.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'd like to make a motion that we add minimum size limit to the agenda.
Okay, is there any, I don't know if we need to do, I guess I'll look for a second on that and then we'll look. So it looks like Kodiak, we have a couple seconds. Kodiak, vessel owners is seconding. Is there any objection to adding that to the agenda?
Chris? PHMA? Oh, guess not. Okay.
Not objecting. Okay. All right. Well, then I would suggest we add it after mortality limits and TCY, because I would expect under agenda item 3, IPHC Secretariat Information Session, that we take it up there, and that we, because we'll have Ian in the room. But did you have a different idea, Jim?
No, I just said that Chris couldn't hear Malcolm. I mean, I could hear him, but it was faint. I don't know if you can, Linda, if you could repeat the motion.
Oh, sure. So the motion was to add a discussion of changing the minimum size limit to our agenda, and I was suggesting we add it after 3.1, since we'll have Ian in the room for that conversation. So if there's no objections to that, we'll take it up soon. It'll be 3.1A. Okay, any other motions? Looks like we've got a couple hands up. Sifa and Dannyville, if there's comments, additions, changes you want to make to the agenda, now's the time to do that. So Did Sifa get the mic or did Sifa take their hand down? Looks like it's down. Is Annieville?
Terry? You have to unmute yourself as well.
Okay. Not working?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Terry. Can you maybe type it into the chat?
Okay, and I would say Kathy has done that. She's not able to speak, but she's asked that we add to the agenda a discussion of the chair, co-chair of the CB to take up under agenda item number 8, other business. So if there's no objection to that, I think we ought to do that. So I'll add that there. Okay, and I think we have pair as FVOA already. Okay. Did we have any luck getting Annieville? Their hands down, so hopefully everybody's good. Okay, any other suggested changes, additions to the motion? Or to the agenda, sorry. Okay, well, I think then we're ready to move to agenda, or should we formally adopt the agenda? Do we need to go through that step?
Yes.
Let's just say, well, we could practice voting, but let's just say if everybody's good with the agenda, don't put up your hand or a red check and we'll count it as good. Okay, so let's go to agenda item 3, and this is mortality limits. TCUI is our first 3.1, and we'll have Ian, I think, in to present on that, right?
That's correct.
Is
Yes.
Ian available, Laura?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. And I think, did we get, it looks like we have in the chat that pair should be the FVOA person, but I think that's who we have. Okay, looks like we have everybody covered. All right, well, just let us know when you have Ian ready.
So maybe while we're waiting for Ian, we can move on to something else.
Yeah, do you know, Laura, is Ian tied up with the commission, or should we expect him any minute?
She's gone to look for him, I think.
Well, I sort of hate to dive into anything else. I guess the season, unless people want to talk for a minute about season opening dates while we're waiting, that's always fun and easy. Looks like FVOA has their hand up. let's not get into motions yet on season opening dates, but if you want to make a comment on that, let's get the mic to Per. Does FEOA have the mic? Wow, this is hard. Okay, it looks like we might now have Ian in the room. Yeah, awesome. So I guess we will turn it over to you, Ian, if you could, on mortality limits in TCY. And then after you finish that, we added to our agenda to talk about the minimum size limit and proposed changes to that. And if it works for you to stick around for a conversation on that, that might be helpful.
Thank you, Linda, and good afternoon. Is my audio working?
It is.
Thank you, Ian.
Excellent. I had a little trouble in the past getting my microphone to turn on. Maybe it was because they were teasing me about my purple suit. Actually, it's a blue blazer, to be honest. I think probably the most efficient way to go would be to just go ahead and field questions on either of my presentations, and as needed, I can speak back through slides. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It could just be a request to speak to a particular slide or slides or even section of the talk, rather than take up your time in trying to go through large portions of those presentations.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess we just open the floor if there's people who have questions on the stock assessments or the decision tables for 2021. If there's a particular slide you'd like to highlight, speak to, ask a question on, floor is open. Put your hand up and we'll try to get the mic to you.
If things are moving slowly, I can also just read in the help desk chat window as well, or actually either of the chat windows if people would rather just type questions in.
Well, it looked like we had somebody's hand up there for a minute. Did that go away? It's hard to tell if someone gets the mic and their hand goes, I mean, they disappear from our view. But so right now there's someone who has their hand up and the mic. So I'll turn that over to Kay, is all it says in my window.
Linda,
Yep.
back here. Can you hear me? Okay, great, thanks. I had a question about a comment that Glenn Merrill made yesterday when we were going through this document about the recalculation of the unguided halibut in 2C and 3A, and I was wondering, is there an updated table or something that we could get to be able to have the information of what those numbers might be?
Yes, thank you. In fact, I was just listening to the general session, and the commissioners were taking a presentation from Sarah Webster on this very topic. In a nutshell, the initial estimates that we received from ADF and G were on the high end of what they later provided as a range of estimates for the unguided recreational sector. I have prepared an alternative mortality projection table that includes those revised estimates, and I believe, I have not checked, but I believe that it might be posted on our website already. I can actually check while we're speaking here and confirm that in the next several minutes if you'd like.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. For the Alaska areas anyway, that's sort of a key piece. Anybody else? Questions, comments on Ian's presentation, the stock assessment decision tables? Nobody. Up, okay. RFA North. Let's give the mic to that person.
Hey, Ian, this is Tom Marking. Something happened interesting in California this year, just for your knowledge. We had a really large migration of small fish come into our area this year, in the 26 to 30 inch range. I mean, we would go out there and drop a line in the water, and within 3 or 4 minutes, you'd have a small halibut on the line. It was like fishing for crappie or bluegill or something. We've never seen this before. And I just wonder if these aren't this 11 and 12 age group coming up, but they're growing slower in this area because our ocean conditions here have been terrible, where our salmon are coming in like a year or two behind their age weight, coming back to the rivers. And I wonder if these are actually not, that age group that we're looking for, but they're just smaller because the feed conditions are so poor. But yeah, we've had this huge migration. We've never seen this in 15 years like this. It was an astounding this year how fast you could catch a fish. It was just a comment.
Thanks for that comment. I think that size range is potentially consistent with the 2011 and 12, more likely 12-year class. We have seen both of those year classes on both sides of the minimum commercial size limit in the last several years. And we've certainly seen some changes in their distribution. In the 2019 data, there were many parts of the coast where those year classes did not show up terribly strongly, particularly 3A, I think is one of the reasons why we saw the downturn in 3A last year. And then this year we saw those year classes quite strongly. Of course, we don't have fifth data, and to be honest, I haven't looked at the commercial data, but I think we get so little of it from California that probably the recreational fishery observation would be the only source of that information. So that's definitely good to hear that those fish have spread all the way south to California, if that's them. Unfortunately, I can also confirm that I do not see that additional slide, but it is of the adjusted unguided recreational removals in 2C and 3A, but the commissioners have asked for that. It's been provided, and so it is somewhere in the pipeline of being delivered to the website in some form or another. So I can provide, perhaps to the chairs, I'll send a note when I've located that and can confirm that it's available for everybody's use.
That would be really helpful. Okay, anybody else with a question or comment, request? Well, we have even here, Dave Frazier. Why don't we give Dave the mic, and then maybe you could list yourself with your organization first. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yes.
Are you hearing me okay? Yeah, Dave Frazier with ACDC is the alternate. I sent an email to Ian this morning asking for clarification on the 3-year surplus. And Ian, you answered that if I understand it right, the 3-year surplus is the level that if we fished it for the next 3 years, we'd end up with the same spawning biomass more or less that we have right now. What throws me about that is that 3-year surplus over 3 years adds up to 75,000 pounds. And under the F43, we're setting a harvest of 39 million pounds. That's half of the 75 over the next 3 years. It seems like with the 50%, excuse me, the risk factor of 50%, you get a 50-50 chance of being worse than that, is an awfully high risk level. I mean, I wouldn't go to a Super Bowl party if I was told I was going to have a 50-50 chance of getting COVID. What am I missing here on the risk level?
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for that question, and I can clarify. So, in fact, I think you've described the 3-year surplus correctly. It is the amount of yield that we could expect to take out of the stock and have an equal 50-50 chance of being below where we are now in terms of spawning biomass at the end of 3 years. And as you correctly point out, taking a yield each year that is on the order of 15 million pounds greater than that surplus production level means that we are, with a very high probability, going to be reducing the spawning biomass over the next 3 years. The F43% level of fishing intensity has roughly a 2 out of 3 chance of dropping the spawning biomass below where it is today over the next 3 years. And that includes the contribution of the 2011 and 12 year class, which is fairly small over the next 3 years because the 2011 year class won't be 12 years old, where they will be at least 50% mature until 2023. And so we are waiting several more years for those fish to reach the spawning biomass. But it is correct to conclude that the Commission, by adopting an F43 policy, is essentially planning to fish down the spawning biomass over the next several years.
Thank you. That was my concern.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Sometimes I push the button on these things. I don't know whether I've turned it off. The next one is, did we just hear from
No,
NPFA?
next one up is NPFA. It looks like that was EDEC. So I think now NPFA has the mic. Malcolm? Maybe he took his hand down. I don't know. So PHMA.
He should be there. Malcolm should be there. His mic's enabled.
Okay. Malcolm he's got an odd icon by his name, so I'm not sure if the mic's working or not, but
Malcolm, you may need to mic yourself on your end.
yeah, we got you now.
How about now? Yeah, wow. Sorry.
You're really faint, at least for me.
Okay, I'll try to speak up. I can't understand how to raise the volume on it, but speak louder, it says.
Yeah, shout. Go ahead.
Okay, slide 53, please, Ian. So I was, and then I guess the question actually has more to do with the mortality projection tool, but when the mortality projection tool has the interim management procedures baked into it, is there a way you can produce what the actual stock distribution would be just using the biological distribution without the management procedures? I'm just looking for the poundage difference.
Thanks, Malcolm. Yes, and I'll repeat the question because I think it was pretty faint. I'm not sure if everybody could hear that very well. The question was, with regard to the mortality projection tool, is there a way to easily see what the distribution of TCEY would be? I believe you were referring to the third row in this table, but prior to the 2A and 2B adjustments, because the mortality projection tool includes those calculations as I've outlined at the bottom of this slide by default. The answer is yes. If you would like to do this on anybody can do this on their own. You can take these percentages from the third row of this slide and put them right in the top of the mortality projection tool. Even though 2A and 2B are grayed out, they are actually available to be edited. So if you type these percentages in across the top, you will be able to see the distribution at 39 million pounds in the absence of the 2A and 2B agreements. And certainly I've already heard from a number of people during this meeting, if you have any trouble doing that or you need to see something else that isn't intuitive on the tool, please just contact me and I can provide a table for you with virtually any version of that. So hopefully that helps some people. So again, even though those two cells, 2A and 2B, are grayed out, they are available for editing on the tool if you choose to do so.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Ian. Is that Chris Bora who has his hand up next?
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me?
Faintly.
Yes. Yeah. I can hear you well.
How's that? Is that any better or worse?
Good now.
Okay, thanks. Okay, my question was just coming back to that unguided recreational in Alaska, the change or something. I couldn't find any sort of background information on it in the documents. It wasn't in the contracting party regulation proposals. Is there? Could you just summarize it again for us, or tell us if there is some background information where it was? Just so we understand it. I think I get the gist of it. I just want to make sure that we know the facts, and we'll look forward to getting that table.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I apologize. Because of the concurrent sessions here, I realize this is a little bit challenging. As I mentioned, just before I came over here, Sarah Webster from ADF&G was presenting a considerable amount of detail on this topic to the commissioners directly. I'm not sure the status of her presentation and whether that will be made available. But I can summarize to the best of my ability the overall set of values that we're talking about. And then you may need to direct some questions back to the commission itself to get any additional clarification. So the unguided recreational removals in IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A are outside the FCUI, which means that they're not formally part of the catch sharing plan in those two areas. And so because of that, we don't recalculate what their contribution is likely to be in an upcoming, in a projection year, the same way we would for example, 2A and 2B, where unguided recreational mortality is part of the catch sharing plan. There we assume that the domestic parties will do whatever they need to do to achieve the mortality limits that are associated with their portion of the catch sharing plan. In 2C and 3A, the unguided recreational sector, we use, like we do for other sources of mortality that aren't formally part of a catch sharing plan, we use the previous year's estimate as a projection of what's most likely to occur in the upcoming year. And of course, in most years, this makes lots of sense because these things don't change that rapidly. Now, 2020 obviously was a different year than most, and the additional challenge is that Alaska Department of Fish and Game does not update these values in time to get them into our process. And so what we have essentially for 2020 is a provisional estimate of what they think the unguided mortality would be, but they won't have the final number for 2020 until later this year after our process is concluded for the year. And so we essentially are left in the situation of rolling forward a 2-year-old number from 2019 forward as the projection for 2021. Now, you didn't see anything in the documentation because subsequent to the interim meeting, Alaska Department of Fish and Game produced a little bit further analysis, and there they provided a range. And that range essentially goes from the values that we estimated that were provided to us early in the process down to somewhat lower levels. And I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me right here, but we're talking about 300,000 or 400,000 pounds difference in those numbers. And at the low end. And this represents two different hypotheses about how much the effort in the unguided sector might have changed in 2020 in response to all of the various travel and other challenges that occurred. And so the question that I received yesterday was whether we could provide an additional table that would show the breakdown of mortality in 2C and 3A, and of course in all other areas, as a function of using the average of the high and low estimates rather than just the high estimates for 2C and 3A. Again, this is being done through the IPHC's process because these components are not part of the catch sharing plan, where generally this would be done as part of a domestic process. So the takeaway from that is that we're talking about a few 100,000 pounds of mortality, which would shift the mortality within 2C and 3A from the unguided to the catch sharing plan, which would then spread that out to the guided recreational and the directed commercial fishery. It would not change the overall TCEY to 2C or 3A, and it would not change the TCEYs to other IPHC regulatory areas. So I'm sorry, without much in the way of material to show you, that's the best I can do. I will note that I have produced that additional table which shows those specific numbers, and I'm just not sure exactly where or if that's been posted yet, but I anticipate that that will be posted soon because I know the commissioners wanted to see that.
That answered your question, Chris. It looks like we have Stablefish, someone with their hand up now. I'm not sure who that is. They have the mic.
Hi, this is Paul
Paul.
Clampett. Do you hear me? I'm with the Sablefish and Halibut Pot Association, Linda. But anyway, question. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I heard in an earlier your testimony to the count of the commissioners earlier. You mentioned that the relationship between spawning biomass and recruitment is unknown for the most part. And I'm asking you if is that correct?
Thanks for the question, Paul. Yes, it is, in fact. I mean, I would say as a general rule, it's unknown for all fish species. We definitely know that if we have no spawning biomass, we get no recruits. But the historical records suggest that even at relatively low spawning biomass, we've seen some large recruitments. And so it's not clear, that relationship is not clear for halibut. We do see on average better recruitment from the Pacific halibut stock when the environmental conditions appear to be favorable, particularly in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's generally on a 20 to 30 year long period. We had a period of relatively high productivity from the late 1970s through the early 2000s when the ocean was more productive, and then we had a period of lower productivity. But yes, we generally have a weak relationship between spawning biomass and subsequent recruitment for halibut.
Right. So knowing that, then the concern that we're actually fishing down the spawning biomass at the moment probably shouldn't be that concerning because environment has probably more to do with large recruitment than anything else. And isn't it kind of a fact that we're moving into good environmental conditions, considering that the positive Pacific decadal oscillation is advantageous for halibut?
Thank you. Yes, we did move from 2013 to 14. It does appear that the Northeast Pacific moved into more favorable conditions for Pacific halibut recruitment. And we stayed in that period from 14 through 2019, with 2020 being the first year in a while that we've seen less favorable conditions. Your comment about spawning biomass, I think, is well taken, that we have identified FB 20% as our level of conservation concern. So when the spawning biomass drops below 20% of the level that we would expect to have in the absence of fishing, that's when we would determine there is potentially a conservation concern. And we don't know exactly whether that's necessarily specifically the right percentage, but that is a common target used worldwide for fish stocks to try to avoid this very question of to try to avoid the situation where we've reduced the spawning biomass to the point where its ability to produce big recruitments has been compromised. And so the IPHC's interim management procedure has that spawning 20% limit reference point and also our 30% trigger reference point, where if we drop below 30% of relative spawning biomass, the target level of fishing intensity begins to drop. As I noted in my presentation, we are currently at 33% of the unfished condition as of beginning of 2021. And so at this point, based on those considerations, there is no suggestion that we have a conservation concern, and we also have no recommended reduction to the level of fishing intensity at an SB 33% level. So hopefully that addresses your comment.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Paul and Ian. Let's see, do we have anybody else that, let's see, any more hands? So hopefully we've given everybody a chance to speak, ask questions on this presentation. While we still have Ian, there was a request for a conversation at least on the change in minimum size, and so I guess I would just invite members of the conference board, if you have questions for Ian on that presentation or wanted to make a comment on that topic, now would be the time. Okay, we had some people ask to put this on the agenda, so I'm expecting that there's some conversation that people were hoping to have.
It can certainly be available as the week goes on as well if additional questions come up.
We got a couple now. Okay, so it looks like Chris Bora should, if we could get the mic to Chris, and then following Chris will be Malcolm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the, part about in the size limit. I take the point that the analysis looks at the short term, and to understand the long-term implications, that's probably best done through an MSE type process, the MSE process. I'm just curious though about the economic, the financial end of it. Just with the assumptions on price, when we're bringing in the U32, the sampled U32, we're not bringing in all the U32. Is that correct? And if that's the case, then does a trip actually sort of represent a normal or a close to normal trip, because it will be underweighted with the smaller fish, and therefore we might not get a true picture of what the prices were.
Thanks, Chris. I think your question specifically is referring to the landing of U32 fish during FIS operations this year in 2020. And you're correct that we only brought in the U32s that were being sacrificed for sampling. So it was only those fish that were part of our otolith sampling and could not be returned unharmed to the ocean. As such, that likely does not provide a very good estimate of the potential price that those fish would earn at the dock. And so for that reason, we didn't focus on that as part of the size limit analysis. Instead, what we did was we looked at the contribution of U32s to the projected catch in terms of a fraction of the catch. And from that information, we could calculate, this is where the 63% came from. We could calculate that 63% as the price you would need to get for those fish for the fishery to break even in the absence of a size limit. So if you brought your fish to the dock and you got 70%, you got 70 cents on the dollar for the U32s compared to the O32s, then coast-wise, the fishery would have gained value because we added yield, we got a little lower price for that yield, but overall it was a net benefit. So you're entirely right. We don't know what the price for those U32s would be, but that 63% is a gauge. So everybody can look at that and say, well, if I think I'm going to do better than 63%, then it's probably a win overall. If I'm going to do worse than that 63%, if it's only 50 cents on the dollar for those U32s, then the fishery, even though it's bringing more pounds to the dock, may actually end up with a lower value. And I know, especially for those of you that catch sablefish as well, this kind of trade-off between yield and value of that yield has been quite important in the last several years. And so that's why we tried to provide that specific reference point there in the absence of a firm estimate of what that price might be. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about what it would take to find that out. And it would seem that it would take several years for the market to really fully respond to the presence of these small fish. So even if we were to change the size limit, it could be some time until we really knew what the long-term value in terms of ex-vessel price would be for those U32 fish.
Thanks for that, Dr. Stewart. Just to follow up then, so when you were figuring out the 63%, that used, assumed like all the U32s caught, not just the samples. In other words, when you were sort of building that for a trip?
That's right. That comes specifically from our projection of what the commercial fishery would likely bring to the dock in the absence of a minimum size limit. So it does not rely on the prices that were seen as part of the FIS this year. Those could potentially provide a starting point for that comparison, but the analysis doesn't rely on that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stewart.
Thank you. Okay, Malcolm, you're next with the mic.
How about that?
We got you.
How about that?
A little bit.
Louder now? Okay, I'll try to speak up. So I'm trying to follow along and I'm having difficulties, but is this the agenda item, or are we just taking information at this point?
We lost you, Malcolm, or I can't hear you.
Malcolm wanted to know if this was an agenda item or we're just taking information. My understanding of this was on the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, then can you hear me now?
And that we had talked about this before the meeting and decided that even though it's called an information session, there is an opportunity for any of these agenda items for a motion and for the conference board to take action if people want to.
Okay, so I guess I'll try to make a motion then. How about that?
I think we're probably, I don't know, Jim. I was thinking we would let people finish asking questions and then take a motion. Okay. All right. So, Malcolm, why don't you hold that, and we have two other people with hands up to ask questions, and then once we have all the questions answered, we'll take motions on either of these first two presentations.
Okay, great. I'm just going to can I just signify then at least that I'm considering making a motion to have the MSB evaluate the possible change in the size limit, just so people can think about that.
Okay, great. We'll come back to you, but thanks for that heads up. Okay, so I'm not sure who UFAWU is, but okay, let's get them mic'd. We got you now.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was just wanting to ask Ian about what impact high grading may have. It seems to me that there'll definitely be some high grading, and it's uncertain how much, unless there's 100% observer or monitoring. But it seems like if there is too much degree of high grading, that any benefit would be lost, in that we would be catching more fish but killing more fish rather than as well. So anyway, that was my question for Ian.
Thanks, Russell. I think it is a fair concern that we wouldn't, and we don't currently have complete information on the catch from the directed commercial fishery. I will say that I think that the same concerns that would occur in the absence of a minimum size limit could occur with the minimum size limit with regard to high grading of the catch. I will say that if in the absence of a minimum size limit, at least for some portions of the fleet and some trips for almost all portions of the fleet, we would at least have comprehensive information on the catch that might provide us at least a starting place to compare and try to evaluate these types of effects. With the current minimum size limit, at least in Alaskan waters, we essentially have no information on the encounter rates of these smaller fish except on the larger vessels.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Pacific Coast. We have the mic.
Yes, good afternoon. I was going to ask Ian the same thing about whether the 63% took into account high grading on the American side. Because with 100% monitoring here, you know, we don't have that problem. But you pretty much answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions, then I think we'll go back to Malcolm, because I know you have a motion ready, and take that, and then we'll see if there's any motions on the mortality limits at this time.
I will sign off and be happy to take any further questions if you need me. Just let our Secretariat staff know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. Okay, so we have the mic back to Malcolm. I don't know, you may need to put your hand up again at MPF. Yeah, we got you now.
How about now? Okay. Well, my motion was going to be for the conference board to recommend that the MSAB further evaluate the effects of eliminating the minimum size limit, including the effects on TCEY and distribution, the fishing intensity, economic considerations, and look at possibly reducing size limit instead of just eliminating it.
So, Malcolm, if we may, through the chairs.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah.
So, Malcolm, will you please email that to me so that we can more easily project it on the screen, even if there's some adjustments to be made?
Okay, and while you're doing that, let's see if there's a second for the motion to have the MSC, MSAB take a look at. Okay, we have a second from Seafood Producers Cooperative.
So I have a question. I have a question for Malcolm, just for clarification.
Does Malcolm? Go ahead.
Yep.
So reducing the size limit as opposed to eliminating it. Do you have any? What's your thoughts on the amount of reduction?
Well, I'd just be shooting from the hip, but I thought like a 30-inch or 26. I mean, 26 seems to be a magical number for us. I don't know why, but.
So are you proposing to look at both? So elimination of the size limit completely, and then as an alternative option, a new minimum size limit of 26 inches.
Yeah, well, I would think 30 would be a reasonable number to look at too, because 30 is at least some meat on it. 26, you're getting pretty skinny. But I mean, the purpose of me making this motion is just to try to, since the commission definitely signified that they're willing to go forward with this and take a hard look at it, I just think that from a conference board point of view, we should be able to get this, you know, further vetted, I guess, is my goal by this motion. But if so, I'm open to suggestions.
Okay, so the way we're interpreting your motion now, or understanding your motion, is to have the use the MSC model, the MSAB process to look at impacts of changing the minimum size to 26 inches, 30 inches, or not having a minimum size limit. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so hopefully we captured, you have that in writing and you can send it to Laura. Is that?
Well, I'm working on it. Quite frankly, I was expecting this to be taken up tomorrow, not today, so I'm a little underprepared.
Okay. Well, I think we should be able to type that up pretty quick if that's the motion.
Yeah, the option, Malcolm, is that you could put it in the help desk and that would get it to us more immediately.
Okay.
So there's a hand up.
Yeah, why don't we have Vancouver or whoever that is, go ahead. We can speak to the motion while Malcolm is getting it written up.
Is that you,
Yeah, you bet. I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with Malcolm's motion. I would support it. I think it's the right way to put it is through the MSAB and take a good look at a lot of this stuff. So that's all. I wasn't sure if we were looking for a seconder or whatnot, but I could definitely support Malcolm's idea. I get where he's trying to go, whether or not you put a 28 or a 30 in there. I think it's an idea of looking at different size limits to and evaluate them, and I think that should be done through the MSAB. So thank you.
Thanks, Lyle. Chris?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it makes sense to send it through the MSAB process, the MSC process. I just would I take the comments from the earlier one of the earlier speakers about you know, the possible implications of removing the size limit. Does it create an incentive to high grade catch and therefore create regulatory compliance concerns? I know we've heard that you know, this is the perception of the fishery if we're discarding fish. Well, equally, we can have perception problems with the fishery if we're high grading or perceived not to be properly monitored. So we have to make sure that we consider that if you know, this is going to require some kind of improved monitoring and directed fisheries in all IPHC regulatory areas to make sure all areas are accounted for. But I think the first step is, I agree, is let's get it looked at through the MSAB process as to understand the long-term implications.
Okay. Is Malcolm, are you typing it up or sending it by email?
We have somebody else who'd like to speak, so let's give them a chance. SFAB South.
Yes, this is Chuck Ashcroft. I'm not sure if you hear me, but are you able to hear? Am I coming through? Okay, great. Yes, as I brought up in the general session this morning, would this tie into the issue as far as migration as well, and both discussions would be then taken up at the MSAB? It's just a question of how we're going to deal with migration in this. It's, I assume that it'll all be part of an MSAB discussion then.
Well, my thoughts is that you run this type of process or a request or change through the MSAB or MSE process, that you can it will cover a wide variety of components, for lack of a better word, for this late in the afternoon. So I think maybe it might be useful to say a couple of such as's impacts. So we've talked about different size ranges, monitoring, migration changes, and maybe we can put that in there if Malcolm is okay with that.
Yeah, that would be appreciated because it does have impacts, and we mostly tying the whole process into one solid look at it. Well, true.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I think we can take those into consideration. I guess what I took from Joseph Planis's presentation, Dr. Planis this morning, is that we may not have answers on migration, and he wasn't ready to put a timeline and when we might know more about migration. So right now they're using a system of assigning U26 based on how the survey sees, proportional to what the survey sees on U26. So I think we could say we'd like that looked at as part of this motion, but if we're really tying it to understanding migration, that might prevent much from coming forward. Okay, it looks like Malcolm. I don't know if Malcolm's looking to speak. Malcolm has the funniest audio. Let's give Malcolm a chance there. Go ahead, Malcolm, and then Dan, I see your hand up next.
That icon actually means speak louder.
Okay, I am looking to.
Just so you.
I am looking to speak.
Yeah, go ahead, Malcolm.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm willing to take some more discussion on this, but I'd also recommend that we table this and maybe do it first thing in the morning. I can have the motion prepared and people can email me the different ideas and what we want to get in instead of trying to, like I said, I thought this was going to be tomorrow, so I'm not fully prepared, but I'm glad we have this conversation. People can email me what they want to get in there so we have a full and complete motion that we could take up first thing in the morning if that's amenable to the body.
If you're making a motion to table, we just would look for a second to table that. And if you want to schedule it to a time certain, looks like a whole bunch of hands ready to second that. And do you want?
Yeah, motion to table.
Okay, and did you say time certain? Do you want to set it to come up first thing tomorrow or?
First thing in the morning.
Okay.
First thing in the morning would be great if we could just get it out of the way.
Okay, so everybody who put their hand up to second that, maybe take your hand down. And then we'll just look to see, motion's table and not debatable, but we'll just look to see if there's any objections to tabling. And
am I super loud now?
You are loud. Is
okay.
RFA North, are you objecting or looking to speak? It looks like, well, okay, that's down. Okay, so let's motion that, table that to first thing tomorrow morning. Okay, and there were, let's see, Dan had your hand up. If you were looking to talk on something other than this issue, put your hand up and we'll give you another chance. If you were wanting to talk to this one, you can save it till tomorrow. And then I guess if anybody had a motion they wanted to make, we are coming back to mortality limits, TCY, but if you had any motion you wanted to make at this time on mortality limits in TCY, now would be the time, or we're going to move on to the MSE. Oh, okay, it looks like we have two hands up, so let's start with Chris, followed by Paul Clampett.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to be clear on what we'd be putting motions on forward. My understanding was we are in a, with the exception of the size limit, we're in an informational session now, and then we're going to go through, we got the information mortality limits, we're going to get the MSE update, economic impact assessment, then we're going to talk about fishing periods, and then mortality limits come up. What motions are we looking to put on the table now?
So I think part of what,
just the way the agenda's laid
out. If anybody had a motion, overall motion that they wanted to make, but you're right, we will be coming back to mortality limits and TCYs later. We had said this time we would allow people to make motions, so I was just going to give people the chance. Let's see what Paul has in mind, and I guess we can decide if that is appropriate or should wait. So Paul, you have the mic.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I was prepared to make a motion about the exploitation rate, but if this is not appropriate time, then I can wait. Do you hear me?
That might be one to hold until after we,
Okay.
yeah,
I'm happy to hold.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Is that Linda Kozak, Kodiak Vessel Owners, with a hand up? Linda, do you have the mic?
Yes. I would prefer, this is Kodiak Vessel Owners, I would prefer that we stick with the agenda and finish getting our information and then look at the fishing period season opening date prior to item number 5, which is mortality limits.
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed. We just I'd had a request that there'd be an opportunity for action. So if people don't have motions, we'll go into the MSE update if Dr. Hicks is available. Has somebody check to see if Dr. Hicks can join us?
Yeah.
Check to see if Dr.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. On our agenda item 3.2, MSE update, and we'll just turn it over to you if you want to give any kind of an overview or open the floor for questions, comments. I'll let you decide how you want to approach this.
Sure. Thank you, chairs, and good to virtually see everybody this afternoon. Yeah, so I gave a presentation earlier today. I believe many people saw that presentation. It was sort of the culmination of many years of research, coding, and running computers and outputting performance metrics. I don't think I'll go through the presentation unless somebody has specific questions or would like me to talk about certain slides. But I will point out a few slides in this presentation that are important. The beginning here identifies those primary objectives that the Commission identified or approved earlier in 2020, I believe it was. Slide 7 shows the harvest strategy policy and especially sort of the framework of the management procedure that we've been working with the coast-wide scale and then distributing the TCY to regulatory areas. Discussion about the management procedures, and the slide 9 is a very useful one that identifies which elements are in these 11 different management procedures. And so you can see that things like management procedure A over here is most similar to our current interim management procedure. And then all the other management procedures have the implementation of a TCY constraint, meaning the TCY cannot exceed 15% from year to year. The change in it cannot exceed 15%. So this is a way to go back when you hear somebody talking about MPK or something like that. You can look at this table and see what elements were present in there. And just to identify, the blue up top is sort of the coast-wide scale related to that. The orange are the related to stock distribution, the red relative harvest rates, and then the green are agreements for 2A and 2B. I want to point out one thing here, the maximum fishing intensity, the buffer of 36%, which shows up in MPD, and just explain that briefly. What that means, you can see MPD also has the agreements for 2A and 2B in it. And often what happens is if you apply the current interim management procedure to maintain that SPR, say, of 43%, you would have to reduce the TCY in areas other than 2A and 2B to allow for that agreement in 2A and 2B. And what MPD does, instead of removing TCY from those other areas, it actually increases the fishing intensity to accommodate those agreements. So even though you're operating at a 43%, it would then say, okay, here's 43%, 2B and 2A didn't get their full agreement, so we'll increase it to an SPR 40%, say. And that's only up to a maximum SPR of 36%. And then after that, the agreements cannot be fully accommodated. So that's sort of how that maximum fishing intensity buffer works. So that's a useful table. Some of the coast-wide results here showing those, and then the identification of these. Well, so I think that someone mentioned this link didn't quite work for the MSE Explorer in this slide, but I would direct you to an info paper, I think it's Info 03, which discusses how to use the MSE Explorer. There are many links in there, including all of the results presented at the past MSAB meetings, as well as the annual meeting, are archived in various links or addresses. So all those links are available there if you want to look at the MSE Explorer. MPD and MPJ were identified as really ranking the best overall. And we ran a few more since the IM, a few more runs using SPR values of 41 and 42%. And if I'm going too long, just cut me off here. I just have too much fun with this. But I wanted to note that the target objective, this 36%, shown by this gray line right along here, is best met in MPD at a SPR of 42%, and is best met at MPJ at a SPR of 41%. And the reason that's useful is if you look down here at the actual sort of short-term TCY that you would expect from these management procedures, they become more similar when comparing across the two different SPR rates in these two management procedures. So it's something to keep in mind. It's hard to do that in the MSE Explorer, but I just wanted to point that out here. And then a comparison of the regulatory area specific performance metrics in the short term here. And you can see things like variability is more even across, or the stability metric is more even across the regulatory areas for MPJ and varies with MPD. Especially in 4B, that variability is reduced quite a bit for MPJ. And here, with an agreement of 1.65 million pounds, you would expect the variability to be 0 for 2A. Basically, it's fixed every year. I note here this is short-term results, which is related to the primary objectives. There is a plot similar to this for long-term results in the extra slides, which show, after applying this management procedure for, 50, 60 years, the stock sort of comes into an equilibrium, and some of these stability metrics are quite different, that there's a slightly different pattern, with the red lines typically being lower than they are in the short term. This is a direct comparison of the median TCYs between D and J, with a slightly higher coast-wide TCY in D than in J, and you can see how that translates to the different regulatory areas. And as expected with an agreement, it's greater in D than without the agreement, and then the other areas that don't have agreements are slightly greater in MPJ. So there's a summary there and some summary of the elements. I wanted to point out relative harvest rates. I know that's of interest to some. In the western areas, current interim management procedure has a lower relative harvest rate in 3B, 4A, 4C, and 4B. And we did a run, I believe it was MPI. I have to look back at that table. But one of those MPs had the relative harvest rate set at 1 for 3B, 4A, and 4C, D, and E. And these MSE results showed a slight reduction in the coast-wide TCY and the AAV, so the stability was better, but the slight reduction in coast-wide TCY with that increased harvest rate in western areas. And of course, the TCY in those western areas was increased with that higher harvest rate. But we identified too that it would be worth examining the migration assumptions further, because migration is going to have a big effect on the results here. So we really want to look more and have a more robust set of migration assumptions for simulation before really coming up with a final conclusion on relative harvest rates. And then these were the recommendations, and then as I said, there are some extra slides. So I can answer any questions or provide any further insights as anyone wishes.
It looks like we do have 2 hands up for questions. So Dan, Alpha, you want to go first?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We got you.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time, Alan, to come in and kind of go over your presentation with us. I know it's been a lot of work on the MSE team, and I think the first thing I'd say is, thank you to the MSE team. I think you guys built an amazing model and have gone into depth quite a bit, and I really appreciate the way you've always included the stakeholders and worked with us to help us understand what's coming out. And then speaking of what comes out, I guess there's 2 things that really struck me as you've been going through your presentation at the interim meeting and here. And one is that there's really 2 outputs from this process. One is the model itself, which kind of gives us, our best insight into stock dynamics and how the stock might respond to different management procedures. And then the second is the objectives themselves and the ranking that follows from that. And they seem like 2, distinct ways of looking at the information. And I wondered if you had any comments on how to use both of them, or does one way more than the other in your mind?
The chair, thanks, Dan. Appreciate the compliments, and the same back to all the stakeholders that have been involved in this process, including MSAB members, as well as the stakeholders I normally talk with at the annual meeting. I'm certainly missing those sidebar discussions this year. But so the sort of 2 insights. I think one thing that we did learn early on through the simulations of this model were expectations, and I think that's something that's a really good outcome of this process, MSE process. Or what should we expect? Like, how often would we expect the TCY to be to be greater than 80 million pounds? And according to these simulations, as shown in the plot here, it's not very often. You actually have to fish at a pretty high fishing intensity to get those, to often, get those TCY levels coastwide above 80 million pounds. So I think that is a good outcome in understanding the dynamics of the population, the variability, and all of that, what might be expected. And then I think what follows from that actually is, now we know those expectations. How can we develop management procedures to try and meet the objectives of the commission and the stakeholders? And we learned one thing with that was the variability tended to be high, the change in the TCY from year to year on the coastwide level. And it became evident that, well, the only, one way to control this variability is to put it right in the management procedure. And we tested that, and we found we could do some various things, like the 15% constraint, a slow up, fast down, has slightly different behavior. Setting the mortality limits every 3rd year had a slightly different behavior, but they all help calm down that variability that was a concern. So I think it can be an evolution, although that evolution is circular in a way, is now we might go back, look at migration assumptions, how that affects the stock, and then begin to develop management procedures after learning more about migration and its effect on the stock that better meet the objectives of the commission. Is that helpful, Dan?
Mike, go ahead. There you go.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, so yeah, thanks. That is helpful. And it kind of flows into, I have a couple more questions if the microphone stays on for me. But one of them is that, one of the things that I found very interesting is the performance of a constraint at both the coastwide level and also the regulatory area level, and how that improved variability. When you applied both of those constraints, I think you looked at a 5-year rolling average, but also a 15% max coastwide. And I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how those two work and how they address different types of variability.
Yeah, through the chair. Thanks, Dan. That's a really good insight, and something that I found was a really good outcome of this is that when we did the coast-wide MSE, it was a concern that the coast-wide TCY was quite variable without some sort of constraint. So we implemented a constraint at the coast-wide level. And then MPJ implemented this averaging of the stock distribution to reduce the variability from year to year that we might see in that stock distribution. And so I've shown this plot here where we have the regulatory areas along the horizontal axis, and you see 4B is the second from the right within a panel. So this really high point here, this is average variability of the TCY, so average change in the TCY from year to year. And you see in 4B that's above 20%. So that's in MPD. And then when we go to MPJ, and just to note, this was a common result, this high 20% average annual variability across all the management procedures except MPJ, which averaged that stock distribution. So one thing that we learned is that stock distribution, the estimation of stock distribution, has its own variability to it, and that has an effect to individual regulatory areas. So one thing that I'm interested in examining in the future is not being so concerned about the coast-wide variability in the TCY, but beginning to be more concerned about the variability in the individual regulatory areas. And looking to address that and identify what the objectives in those individual regulatory areas are, and seeing if we can better meet the objectives on that level rather than trying to meet on the coastwide. So it doesn't matter if the coastwide changes by 100%, but if each of the regulatory areas remains constant over time, I think most people would remain happy.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for that. I guess I had just one more question, and then a last one would be something about where the MSAB's going next. So I guess there's two more, just to give everybody a heads up. I found your slide 26 really interesting, and you think you could flip to it. I think this is another one of those things where it's a model output that I find really interesting, and it's the effect of the interim agreement, MPB, on the spawning biomass in Region 2. And, I'll preface it to try and lower everyone's blood pressure that we understand that all 11 management procedures met our biological sustainability objectives, but they do have different impacts on the different areas. It's the trade-offs is what we talked about. And this is one that I think is particularly insightful, and that's the effect of, large harvests on the spawning biomass in Region 2. That doesn't jeopardize the sustainability of the stock, but it does have an impact on the other areas in Region 2, specifically 2C. And now, since spawning biomass is kind of closely related to O32, which is what we're currently basing our TCEYs on, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this might affect the kind of the base distribution for 2C if the spawning biomass is kind of being depressed in Region 2.
Through the chair, thanks again, Dan. I really like this slide too. I think it's an important slide to note. And as you said, all of these meet the conservation objectives, but it's examining those trade-offs between these regulatory areas, basically. And that's the hard part of the MSE process. The coastwide MSE was a great warm-up for us because it was clear, it was directly related to objectives. Now we're in the hard part. And to complement the MSAB, they've done a fantastic job, evaluating these trade-offs and coming to some great conclusions. With that being said, what this plot shows is across these different management procedures where G through K did not contain any sort of agreement, A through F contained some sort of agreement, where E only had 2A and F had a 20% national share for 2B only, that you can see the spawning biomass is, between 13 and 16% in the long term when there are the agreements in 2, and it's, a little bit higher, 16 to 19% without those agreements in Region 2. And again, this is the long term. We've been looking at short-term fishery objectives, but it has been interesting for me to look at the long-term effects of these things. And that's where you'll see in the next 4 to 14 years, I don't know that we'll see much sort of change in the spawning biomass in Region 2 based on the agreements, but in the long term, we do see that change. And you can investigate this in the MSE Explorer. I think what you'll see, and I can't remember exactly, it's been a while since I've looked at this in terms of exact effects on regulatory areas. Actually, let's just take a quick look, because I think it'll show it in this slide here. These are the performance metrics, and what you can see here, for example, are the TCY, the median average TCY in the long term for these different areas. If you compare this to the short term slide, you might see that these differences between the two are slightly more, but I cannot remember if the actual TCY is less or more in which specific areas, and we'd have to go to the MSE Explorer to investigate that exactly.
Okay, thanks. I can look at that tonight. I guess the last thing that I wanted to ask about was, I don't know if you were in the room, but we were talking about potentially a motion coming tomorrow to have the MSE team and MSAB look at minimum size limits. And I was just kind of wanted your perspective on what that might entail and what areas of that topic, for example, the effect on long-term yield and perhaps some distribution effects, the MSE tool can give us insights on, and if there are other aspects of that that the MSE tool will be less useful on, such as perhaps market responses. But I was wondering if you could help us as we're thinking about how to focus our request of the MSE team and the MSAB when we consider changing the minimum size limit. What would be, where would we get our biggest bang for the buck in the MSAB process?
Through the chair, thanks, Dan. I did catch that discussion at the very end, but I didn't catch the beginning, so I wasn't exactly sure where it was at. But you're right, and to preface this, I'm not sure, I think the CB meeting had already started. The Commission was having a discussion about tasks for the MSE process, and they asked that the MSE team put together sort of a list of potential tasks that they could discuss with the commissioners tomorrow afternoon, I believe, sometime. So hopefully we'll be able to identify sort of priorities of the Commission related to the MSE. And it sounds to me like size limits is one of the priorities that may emerge from this exercise. So I'm glad to hear that you're discussing it in the CB and interested in where we can get the biggest bang for our buck from the MSE model. The MSE framework that was developed by the MSE team was developed exactly for this reason, to identify, well, once specific questions related to management procedures are identified, that we can go away and quickly analyze them using the framework. The difficulty that I tried to explain to Commissioner Merrill when he asked the question earlier today is that the framework has really focused on the current paradigm of the modeling of Pacific halibut at the Commission, and that modeling has not ignored growth, but made a different assumption about how to determine the weight of fish from an age of a fish, and it's basically bypassed the length modeling, which it's really, there's a lot of unknowns there and a lot of variability there that would have to be modeled. And so for us to do really, the best job possible in investigating the long-term effects of size limits, we would have to go and do some research on growth, what the variability in growth is, what the relationships are, code that into the model, and then be able to translate from age to length to weight. And right now we go directly age to weight, and that's what Dr. Stewart always talks about with the empirical weighted age. And that's a great way to do things because we just don't want to deal with growth in Pacific halibut. It's too complex and it just gets noisy and in the way, to be honest, so it's a much better approach. Size limits would require us to do that. However, if the Commission does request this analysis, by the interim meeting in 2021, we could go away, make some assumptions in the operating model that would relate age and weight and guess at what size limits might be for an age and weight of a fish. It wouldn't be as robust as modeling growth, but it would definitely provide some more insight into the long-term effects. So that's a decision for the commission to make, how much time they want the MSE team to spend on this and what they're willing to get in return on that. With that being said, I think where we might go, there was some discussion about size limits only in specific areas or regions. That would be interesting to know if there's any interest in that. I think the MSE framework can definitely investigate that, size limits in certain regions. We would definitely be able to produce all the performance metrics we currently have. Long-term economics is more difficult. Just, predicting what economics may be in 40, 50 years is difficult amongst itself. But, we would get an idea of how the migration does affect size limits and how certain regulatory areas are affected by size limits given a migration. So being that said, I think before we really get a good analysis of size limits, we'd also have to improve the assumptions of migration and the variability of migration in the operating model as well. So there are many tasks, I think, that can be done to improve the framework that should be done at this point in time. And that would help understand with the size limits. But for now, I think contrasting long-term effects to the short-term effects that Dr. Stewart has already presented on a coast-wide level would be useful, just to see where are we at and how does this differ in the long term and what is the variability in the long term. And then potentially looking at specific regions that may want to implement a size limit and other regions that may want. And then relating that back to migration assumptions and what about migration in Pacific halibut might affect certain regulatory areas if size limits are removed.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we are moving now to a question from NGFA. You should have the mic. And we've got CGO and PHMA next.
Hey guys.
Got you.
Got me? Hey Alan, hey everybody. Thanks for joining us and enjoyed the presentation today. I had a quick question for you. I tried to post it after your presentation but didn't get up. So I was curious if there are any mechanisms within the various management procedures to trigger adjustments to harvest rates based on changes in biological distribution. I'm just bringing this up because we're seeing some trends that maybe the growth rates of halibut are moving in a positive direction, and just it doesn't seem that long ago, back in 1999 in 3B we had like 33% of the stock distribution, and I was just curious if there was any flexibility within the model within these management procedures to trigger a change in harvest rates in areas if there was to be a big shift.
Yeah, through the chair, a great question, and that's sort of a side effect of this, what we call this SPR-based management or this SPR approach, and then using actual stock distribution, the 032 weight, estimated weight of the distribution of fish amongst the regulatory areas. It's going to be sort of a side effect outcome, is that the harvest rate will be proportional to that distribution of fish, minus all the other adjustments after the stock distribution. So using stock distribution, first off, is going to allow more harvest where the fish are bigger and there is more distribution in fish. So if there are long-term changes in distribution where fish tend to be more in the western areas than the eastern areas, the harvest is going to shift over to those areas because more TCY will be distributed to those areas. So that's really one benefit of using stock distribution in this process. The other part of it is that the coast-wide TCY on its own is going to be responsive to changes in the growth and the changes in the weight of fish. So if as Dr. Stewart presented, there's some optimism there that the size of fish at age is increasing, and that should translate into higher TCUIs on the coastwide level. And then if that size at age is increasing in only certain areas, say 3A or something like that, and their stock distribution goes from 30 to 40%, they will get more TCUI in that area as well. So this process is responsive to those changes in distribution already.
Got it. Thanks for the answer.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, I think we have Chris next. No, sorry, Forrest next, and then Chris.
Okay, you got me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Hi. Hey, I appreciate this. Always really good to see this information again, and you've got some new slides. I'm going to bounce a little bit off of the slide that Dan Falvey had you pull up. You don't have to bring it back up. It's just the yield to Region 2 based on different management procedures. And I'm really excited about using the Explorer tool. You know, it took me a while to get a handle on it. But I've got some, we were always instructed not to look at like actual TCY necessarily, but like compare relative changes between management procedures. But I'm having a struggle with that, like lining up the interim management procedure against management procedure J. It brings 2, and I'm looking at 2C being a 2C representative. It brings 2C down into level TCY levels like 3 to 4 million pounds, and we have we have our non-FCY hovers somewhere around 2 million pounds, so there's not a whole lot left there. And so, is there, moving forward, is there a way to help the MSC better reflect actual yield in the long term and midterm and short term, or is that actually maybe what we would be looking at? I know this is a long-winded question, but also just on top of that, I did notice that there were effects on 3A as well, lesser on other areas, but their percentages were down, but their yields seemed to hold a little better. So anyway, if you could help me like understand what to look forward to if there were any changes that would help inform the model, or how I can grapple, because ultimately, percentages don't translate to me figuring out what that's going to be for my cat strain plan component. So hopefully that was clear enough. Thanks.
Through the chair, thanks, Forrest. Another great question. And yes, when we met in August with the MSAB, there were definitely some issues in the model, and it actually wasn't one of it was, well, there were some issues in the estimation approaches there that we have since resolved. And so at that time in August, we said definitely don't look at the actual absolute values of the TCY. You'll see like 2 million pounds, that's not what it would actually be, but to have those sort of relative comparisons between the management procedures. Since that meeting and before the October MSAB meeting, the MSE team did a lot of work to correct that problem. And we certainly believe that we have a better model now that is more reflective of the actual magnitudes that would be observed over the simulation period. But with that said, really the objective of management strategy evaluation is not to predict what's going to happen exactly in the future, but it is to compare management procedures in the presence of uncertainty. And that's why you do see a lot of uncertainty. And I understand the frustration with me saying that is you say, well, we need 4 million pounds in our area for this management procedure to work. So that is an objective, and I get that. So what I would say is, look at the relative performance of these management procedures to others, see if one's performed better than others. And then as a secondary approach, do have a look at the absolute values and see that these are working according to the objectives that one may have in their regulatory area. We believe that they are more representative, but the other caution there is trying to, simulating out 40, 50, 60 years is, we just really can't say what the TCY is going to be, but we can characterize what the variability might look like and which ones might perform better than others. So I think that's the primary. As a secondary, don't be afraid to look at the magnitude and say none of these management procedures meets our objective of the whatever million pounds in my regulatory area, and we need to figure out something that does meet that objective.
I think we're ready for Chris. Can we get the mic to Chris? No.
Okay, can you hear me? First of all, yeah, Dr. Hicks, thank you to you and your team for all the hard work. I think that when we really look back and reflect on what was accomplished, it's actually a fair bit. We simulation tested the harvest control rule, fishing intensity, found a whole bunch of different ways to distribute the TCY. A lot of that stuff really hadn't been done, and and now we've got something there that we can point to. So I think it's understanding what we accomplished is I don't think we should understate it. One thing I did want to talk about though was on for management for slide 26 here. I think it's we pointed out the trade-offs between the regulatory areas and the different management procedures, and I think that's important. I think one thing, though, in this one would also be useful to show is that how it affects the spawning biomass in the other regions, because if you look, for example, region 4 is kind of the opposite. Its percentage of the spawning biomass goes up in the 2A, 2B agreement. So I think it's just when you look at all of them in concert, you sort of get a sense of it's all about the trade-offs. Given they're all meeting the conservation objectives, they all produce a similar coastwide TCUI. But I think this is helpful because I think it's really that something we all struggle with is understanding those trade-offs. But one question I did have on this slide is you've used 25 and 75 percentiles. In other cases, you use 5 and 95. And I ran this one looking at it with the 95 and 5 just to see what that would look like. And I know when you have the confidence intervals, if they don't overlap, it means there's statistically significant difference between them. But if they do overlap, it's not necessarily true. Like, in other words, they still could be, still could be statistically significant. But I just wonder when do we use the 5 and 95, and when do we use something like 25 and 75? Just because it can kind of give a different picture, and I wonder if there's some rule so we're all aware of that.
Through the chair, great question, Chris. And I did my master's degree in statistics, so I definitely appreciate that question. And I was contemplating probably this last year, well, holed up in my office all year, how far I've moved away from pure statistics into the simulation realm. And so the first thing I want to note is that with these simulations, we're really not trying to look for statistical significant differences. We're trying to look at the variability amongst these things. So a couple of things that I look for in these plots is how wide are these intervals, and they all seem about the same across there. Maybe E is a little bit less in terms of the distance between those two. But, if we compare C and D, for example, we can certainly say, well, you'll definitely be achieving similar things across both those management procedures, but on average, D is slightly higher, and that may be a desire from the management procedure. So we're not necessarily looking for overlap of these intervals or statistical significance. We're looking at the size of the intervals and where the intervals come to. And that brings a good point, is that, this was a ad hoc decision by me, I think when I chose a long time ago to present 25th and 75th percentiles. The reason that I chose them, and we also in the MSE Explorer, we also do show the 5th and 95th percentiles for the reasons that you're talking, is to see different pictures of the range of these outcomes. I like to look at the 25th and 75th because that identifies sort of that central 50% of the simulations occur in this range. And it allows you to get a better picture of what things look like on average without worrying about the tails. Going out to the 5th and the 95th percentiles, one, it takes a lot of simulations to properly characterize what we call the tails, the sort of extremes of those distributions, because you don't get observations out there very often. So if you're trying to characterize the 5th and 95th percentiles, that means only 10% of your simulations were greater than those. So you need a lot of simulations. So sometimes they just aren't accurate, whereas the 25th and 75th will be more accurate. We've done 500 simulations for most of these management procedures, so the 5th and 95th are mostly accurate. And they do supply a different picture, is, you know, that these are the extreme tails. Do you want to look at those extreme events, or do you want to focus on the center part? And it's just two ways to look at them. And I just happen to choose it here to focus on the central part. Including the 5th and the 95th is going to widen these a lot, and it's also going to make the scale a little bit longer on the vertical axis, and so more difficult to actually make these comparisons of the central tendencies. So, but you're right. I mean, when you actually compare things like J to D, there's a lot of overlap, there. And so, you know, probably J, if we looked at it, we can actually do performance metrics like by how often would MPJ be greater than MPD, and then we look at the individual trajectories and see when is J greater than D given those specific assumptions of that one simulation. So we can get pretty advanced with these types of statistics. But yeah, it's all about how you present it, and one of the tasks that I'll be presenting to the commissioners tomorrow is related to evaluation and outreach. And that is one thing that I did hope to work with the MSAB more, which just, you know, we didn't have time for, is what are the best ways to present these results? And that's of a real big interest to me, is being able to present results to stakeholders in a meaningful and interpretable way. So I do appreciate the feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Hickson. And again, thank you for your time on this. I know you really put your heart and soul into this, and thank you personally for answering my question on that long weekend when you should have been not working and you were.
There are such things as long weekends?
Well, apparently not for you, but I appreciate you responding to my email when I couldn't figure out how to make the MSC.
You know what? I do appreciate working with stakeholders. That is really where my heart is. So it's been fun for me working with everybody, and I certainly appreciate being here in the CB today.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And I always say we're the luckiest stakeholders in the world with a team we get to work with at the IPHC. So really appreciate you and Ian and the rest of the team. Any other questions for Alan before we let him go? Great. Well, thanks so much, Alan. I think our next presenter is, I always ruin the last name on this one, but Basha, I can get the first name right. Do people need just a 5-minute break before we go into one more presentation? Jim, what do you think?
That's a good idea.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Let's just take a quick 5-minute break and come back and see if we can't get through our one last presentation. Hello, Chair.
we're back.
Thanks. We're ready to go. And then, so I guess after we hear this last presentation, there would be an opportunity if anybody has a motion to make relative to either the MSE or the economic impact assessment. So just so people know, that's when we could entertain any motions on those two agenda items. Okay. I think we're good to go.
Thank you. Could you please confirm that you can hear me well?
I can hear you well. Yep. Thank you.
Hello? Can you
We
hear
can
me?
hear you, but it sounds like maybe you can't hear us.
Actually, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Could you please confirm?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I just got the message that you can hear me. I just didn't get, I wasn't sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to let me present the update on the IPHC economic study. I'll try to make a slightly briefer introduction to the project than I gave to at the main room, and but please feel free to ask questions to any aspect that you are interested in. So the goal of the IPHC economic study is to provide stakeholders with an accurate and all-sector encompassing assessment of the economic impact of specific hardwood resource in Canada and the United States. So I don't have a control over my presentation. Oh, okay. Now it's working. Thank you. Sorry. I'll start my presentation with explaining economic impact. The economic effect of changes to harvest levels can be far-reaching. Besides direct impact for fisheries typically measured in terms of landing value, there's a ripple effect for the whole economy. I'll go through various components of the total economic impact related to commercial and recreational fishing and how these play out in a multi-regional setting. I'll not go into technical details about the model. I will focus rather on the inputs to the model and share some preliminary results from the project and how these should be interpreted. I'll wrap up the presentation with a few words on other activities and plan for the year ahead with respect to the project. Industries that supply commercial fishing vessels with inputs rely on this demand when making decisions related to their production levels and expenditure patterns. For example, vessels making more fishing trips purchase more fuel or leave more money in a local grocery store. More vessel activity means also more business to your suppliers, for example. An increase in landings also brings more employment opportunities and, as a result, more income from wages is in circulation. When spending their incomes, households support local economic activity, and this is very important to the prosperity of coastal communities. Changes in domestic fisheries output, unless fully substituted by imports, are also associated with production adjustments by industries that rely on the supply of fish, mainly seafood processors, but the whole value chain includes also wholesale, retail, and services. Any impact on those industries is magnifying the economic impact related to a specific hardwood changes to Pacific Halibut outputs related to any management decisions that alter harvest levels. The economic impacts are also related to the recreational fishing sector. By running their businesses, charter owners create demand for fuel, bait, or fishing trip provisions. They also create employment opportunities and generate income that will, when spent locally, support various local businesses. There's a number of sectors supporting Pacific Halibut, both guided and unguided sector. These can be lodging, retailers, restaurants. The interlinked nature of the industries in the economy is also creating cross-regional impacts. Economic benefits from the primary area of resource extraction are linked when inputs are imported or wages earned by non-residents are spent outside the place of employment. At the same time, there's also an inflow of economic benefits to the local economy from the outside when products are exported, so local businesses are bringing cash to the region through support of tourism. To give you an example, the economic activity generated by vessel maintenance sector by vessel fishing in Alaska, that is a vessel that benefits from Alaska-based resource, could be in the same region where the harvest occurs. That is when vessel is serviced in any Alaskan port, but also these can be in other regions. This happens when, for example, vessel repairs are done in, say, Seattle. I'm also looking into flow of fishing-related income. Economic activity is generated locally when households spend their income in a local grocery store, but when wages are paid to non-residents, the majority of that money will flow to the place of their primary residence. Similarly, if the quota share is owned by a non-resident, then the returns to that holding will leak away from where the resource is extracted. For example, currently about 40% of Alaska quota share units are reported as owned by residents of other states. For recreational fishing, economic impact can be created in the area where the angler is fishing, for example, through local lodging provider, but also elsewhere when the angler is, for example, equipping himself in the area where he or she normally resides instead of where he actually fishes. Now I will define the type of economic metrics I am using throughout this project. The direct economic impacts in the context of the model I'm working on include changes to Pacific Halibut output realized by direct users of the Pacific Halibut resource, that is fishers. On the other hand, the indirect economic impact provides an estimate of the impact on upstream economic activities associated with supplying intermediate inputs to the Pacific Halibut fishing fleet. For example, these will be impacts occurring through vessel repair and maintenance sector. The induced economic impacts cover production and imports associated with spending on consumption of earnings that rely on the Pacific Halibut resource. The economic impacts are derived from the model that is based on multi-regional social accounting matrix that is an extension of a traditional input-output model, the most traditional way of modeling economic impact. When it comes to the model setup, the most important thing to keep in mind is that the model accommodates cross-regional effects. The model is designed to create economic impact for 3 primary Pacific Halibut producing regions, but also for regions that for residual regions to account for these cross-boundary effects of fishing. The current version of the model is built using a broad set of secondary data sources. The model relies on a number of fisheries-related statistics available through NOAA, DFO, and other regional agencies, as well as on the other economic statistics and supplementary data on household accounts from various governmental agencies, including U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, U.S. Census, and Statistics Canada. However, more accuracy can be achieved by incorporating into the model primary economic data collected directly from members of the Pacific Harbor-dependent sectors. An essential input to the social accounting matrix is data on production structure. This is the data on the distribution of revenue between profit and expenditure items. And that brings me to our primary data collection effort. In order to accurately capture economic impact described, we designed a series of surveys to gather information from the Pacific Harbor sector, that is from harvesters, processors, and charter business owners. The survey for commercial vessels and the processing sector have been announced last year, but since then these were considerably revised and simplified. There's also now a new effort to collect data on sport fishing that was announced just last fall. The IPHC stakeholders are encouraged to fill relevant survey forms and contribute to the assessment of the importance of Pacific Harbor resource. The new survey forms are now available in an easy-to-fill web-based application form that can be opened on the smartphone or computer and directly submitted to the Secretariat. While the current version of the model incorporates only secondary data sources, the plan is to revise the model with data collected through the survey. Before I move to the results, I would also like to take a minute to talk about the impact of COVID on the primary data collection. The pandemic was a major impediment to successful primary data collection in 2020. The survey announcement happened just shortly before the outbreak. That has shifted the focus of participants to the Pacific Harbor fishery. Intensified effort to reach out to commercial vessel owners was made through the IPHC fisheries data specialists throughout the season. However, to this date, too few responses have been received to make reliable estimates for the sector. The new survey forms allow participants to fill the information for both 2019 and 2020. Filling form, I strongly encourage filling both data for both years. Also retrospectively submit information for 2019. Note that data for 2019 covering pre-COVID operations can be considered a baseline suitable for drawing conclusions under normal circumstances and using for predictions. Data for 2020, on the other hand, covers an abnormal year of operations and can be used to assess losses incurred by the sector, but also assess sector's resilience to unfavorable endogenous circumstances. If the project continues and data for 2021 are collected, the project also could inform on the response to the crisis and path to the recovery. Let me also add that this type of data is typically collected periodically In general, the production structure is not changing substantially from year to year. However, given the unusual period, the data collected for 2019 to 2021 would have a unique value and could be used to assess more substantial shifts in the fishery. That could be very helpful for modeling. Let me show you a few of the preliminary results. Note that these are limited to the commercial sector. The inclusion of the recreational sector is underway. The preliminary results suggest that the Pacific Halibut commercial fishing total estimated impact in 2018 amounts to over $660 million in output. This is over 5 times the fishery output value of about $130 million recorded for 2018. The estimate is the total economic impact, the sum of direct, indirect, and induced effects from changes to Pacific Halibut fishing sector, as well as indirect and induced effects associated with a forward-linked Pacific Halibut processing sector. Here are some other very interesting results. I can now also show how incorporating Pacific Halibut specific outflows impact the results. The estimates here suggest that $1 of Pacific Halibut output in Alaska could generate 54 cents for Alaskan households, according to the model of no cross-regional earnings flow. Out of state employment and flow of earnings related to beneficial ownership of Pacific Halibut fishing rights in Alaska could cause this estimate to drop to 39 cents. Here you can also see that this drop is compensated by an increase in other U.S. regions, the West Coast and the rest of the U.S. While the presented just presented results are intended to highlight the potential magnitude of economic impact, the complexity of Pacific Halibut supply side restrictions in the form of regional-based allocations suggests the need for a tool enabling regulators to assess various combinations of allocations between regions. To address that, the results I presented are also complemented by an interactive web-based application allowing users to estimate and visualize joint effects based on custom changes that are simultaneously applied to all IPHC managed Pacific Halibut producing areas. Here I have a snapshot of the tool. You can interact with it also using the link provided here or on our website. This allows you to select type of impact you're interested and economic metrics that one can choose depending on the management action in priority. The priorities might differ and there might be more weight put on the impact on for example, wages or impact on households instead of looking just on the impact on the output. To conclude, the model is designed to give a comprehensive understanding of the impact of the Pacific Halibut resource have on the economies of Canada and the United States. The adopted methodology provides tangible estimates of economic interdependencies, highlighting the fact that the resource is supporting numerous industries that supply commercial fishing, as well as rely on the output from commercial fishing for continuous activity. The model also accounts for cross-regional effects to accurately assess transboundary flows of benefits. The results suggest that the revenue generated by Pacific halibut at the harvest stage accounts for only a fraction of economic activity that would be foregone if the resource was not available. The resource also supports other industries and contributes to the GDP and has a considerable impact on employment and households in both countries. Understanding such a broad scope of impact is essential for designing policies that have desired effects depending on regulators' priorities. Moving forward, though, there are a few things to add to the model. First of all, my priority is to include recreational sector. This is more challenging with secondary data, and I hope for broad participation of the sector in the survey. Survey data will be used to revise results based on the IPHC collected data and help improve the estimates presented to you. As a part of the project, I'm also looking at informing stakeholders on community impacts of Pacific halibut. Over the next year, I will be working on how to translate the regional effects to estimates at a finer spatial scale, paying a particular attention also to capturing the benefits flow between rural and urban areas. I will also look at the price dynamics in the context of the economic impact estimation and look into the impact of COVID and how to address that in the model. Given the lack of economic data on the subsistence sector, I'm also working on an approach to study this component, to include this component in the study, and I am doing this particular part in collaboration with NOAA Alaska Center. I'll wrap up my presentation with mentioning other activities at the IPHC. Moving forward, the plan is also to routinely provide economic perspective on regulatory proposals. And while the sustainability of the resource is uncompromisable, I will highlight that good understanding of how a regulatory change is going to affect the resource stakeholders should be always thought as a part of the decision-making process. I'll also continue providing economics-oriented input to research activities when needed. And there's also, I see, a great deal of potential in adding economic metrics to the MSC. You could hear multiple comments today on the trade-offs in management procedures, and economic metrics could be a very useful complement to the work that you've been hearing about from Dr. Hicks. And with that, I will finish, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
For that presentation. It's really great to see this work. So while we wait to see if anybody else raises their hands, I might just lead with a question to ask whether this is information you plan to provide to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. It's a lot of economic information going beyond the ex-vessel level that we're all often struggling to find in the council system. I'm wondering if we're not being heard. Is that right, Laura? Can Dr. Husnet?
Oh, yes, fair enough. Let me confirm.
I'm sorry, did you say she can't hear us? Is there a way to change that?
Yes, so we're working on it. She can't hear us. Hold on.
Okay, well, looks like we've lost her. So I tried sending that question to her, but maybe I can follow up on that one. And it looks like we don't have other questions on this topic. And I'm thinking maybe given that time, Jim, we should probably wrap up for the night. Does that sound right to you? Yeah, I gotcha.
Can you hear me now? Okay, yeah. No, I think so. Some of the Canadians have to go to another meeting as well. So I think if there's any further things we can clear up tomorrow morning along with the motion on.
Yeah, so I think if we're starting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Alaska time and 9 UC lower 48 time, and the...
Okay, I apologize. There's some problem with the audio. Can you hear me now? And
yeah, we can. And maybe I'll just finish up sort of letting people know what to expect in the morning. And then I did have one question for you, if you don't mind holding on for just a minute. Thank you. So just so people know, we're reconvening tomorrow, 9 Pacific, 8 Alaska, and we'll start with what we scheduled to time certain, which is the motion from NPSA or Malcolm on the MSAB taking a look at the minimum size limit and changes to that. We'll also give an opportunity for anybody that wants to make a motion relative to the MSC update or the economic impact assessment that we just saw a presentation on. And then we'll move into fishing periods after that. So thank you all. If you want to sign off for the night, you can. I was going to re-ask my question now that we have Dr. Hosnick back, and we'll...
Just one more housekeeping thing. I think Kathy brought it up. So is there going to be a new link to join the conference board tomorrow morning, or is it the same one?
Okay. Hopefully people heard that. Same link you used for today will work for tomorrow. Great. All right. Well, thank you. And and someone's asking that the motion be emailed out. I think that probably means Malcolm's motion. So we'll see if the staff can do that, or if you want to send it to us. Well, let's see. No, I don't have the full list. So see if the staff can do that. Conference board members.
Yes, we can certainly email the motions when we receive them.
Great. Okay, and then my question, if you don't mind answering one more tonight, or one tonight would be to know whether this information that you just presented will be presented to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. Uh-oh, did we lose Basha again?
He looks frozen.
Okay. I will just ask her that on the side. Let's wrap up for the night. We've gone over time a little bit. We'll let everybody take a break. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Same link.
Okay, thank you.